They recently had an opportunity to talk to one of Rails experts on Savate, an international sport in martial arts. They may not be known as much here in Laredo, but certainly has legions of supporters all over the world. I spent some time with the former Savate contender and local businessman, Mr. Professor Buitron, who actually is very familiar with that particular martial arts form. And we talked about his journey in life, the future Savate, and the future Olympic committee. Good day.
Hey, how are we doing? You doing good? Thank
Just
you.
fine. Thank you for taking a few minutes to talk about something. You've been known for so many years about practicing and living the world Savate, which is a martial arts form. You are a lifelong Laredo and a sixth generation Texan and American. How long have you known Savate in your life? How long have you had it as part of your life?
Well, number one, I want to thank you for doing this and for that. It hits home. Wow. I got involved at the age of 6. I got involved at the age of 6 with my uncle, and it's a funny story, but it's one that might resonate with a lot of people. My father, as you know, is a physician, and when we moved here, we started basically. I went to go play in the playground. I got beaten up, and the next day my dad took me to my uncle and he says, "Teach him." At first, I didn't know what I was learning until I grew and I started asking questions. What is this? Where's it coming from? And my uncle will always say, "What you're learning is cipota." And cipota is an older form. It's a Basque word for savate. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And I did other martial arts because we lived in different places, but that's basically what it was. It was my uncle's involvement with that. He used to say, "Boxing's for the ring, and cipota's for the street," and that's how I grew.
Well, that's interesting because how did your uncle become aware of this street fighting form?
That's a good question. Buitrons are Basque. That's the last name Buitron is Basque. We've been here for a very long time.
From Spain, the region in
Right,
Spain.
correct. They got here shy of the 1800s, the turn of the century. They've been in Texas ever since. My grandfather, fought in World War One. His younger brother, was kind of raised by his uncles, and that's where he picked it up at. And his name was Niceforo. They used to call him Pepo, and he was the one that taught my dad's brothers because my dad he was born to both. My grandfather was a widower and my grandmother was a widow, and so she already had kids that were much older than him. But Pepper will come around and teach them. That's all they know about that.
But actually, they brought it in from Spain. I mean, that was an old traditional family tradition.
Probably, and more likely. And when you look at stuff like this, for a very long time, it was very clannish. You protected the families, you taught the families, you taught those that you loved how to defend themselves. Right. For them, in case they needed to do so, they did that. But in France itself, it was like that for a while. But it became, how can I say, a school around the 1803, 1805, right. More or less.
But coming back to your early life, now
Sure.
you learned this since you were 6, 7 years old, and you kept this as part of your life during those early years. I mean, did you attend any training back then?
Sure. Sometimes we lived in Louisville, Kentucky at one particular time, and my dad took me to a school because I was always getting picked on. I was smaller than everybody else. I was not good at basketball. It was kind of, I couldn't fit in.
You didn't play sports, right? You didn't play football or basketball, but you found a particular form here.
Absolutely.
That fit you.
Absolutely. And so that's basically how it became.
How it developed.
Yeah.
And has it been a part of your life ever since then?
Absolutely. It's how can I say? There's the traits that Savate builds that trait of fellowship. It builds something that when you're inside, it gives you a little bit of courage. It gives you a little bit of stability, be a little bit more centered.
Right.
There's things that I learned from each of the professors that I've had.
Did anyone else from your family pick up that particular
Sure.
martial arts?
Sure. my father and my uncle, they started teaching here in '88, which makes this actually the first school, not club, school in the U.S. Very much recognized by the French Federation and the International Federation.
I guess what I'd like to ask you is for the audience here to understand, Savate is one form of martial arts,
Sure.
and some martial arts are part of the Olympic Committee, but some are not. But this particular one is different from, let's say, boxing and jiu-jitsu and taekwondo and other things like that. Is that correct?
Correct. Martial arts encompasses large spaces. It's a name for the warrior arts or the arts of defense. And every culture, every nation has had it, has had
In their own way, they've had it.
Because they had to learn how to
I mean,
defend themselves.
we all figure that martial arts, all of them came from Asia, let's say. But in reality, it's grown all over the world in their own forms.
Absolutely. Every nation that ever had an army, every person that ever defended himself had to learn something. And what starts happening is you start collectively learning from this person. You start going with like-minded people. It starts becoming a style. So many countries, many areas have a style of fighting. Savate is a style of fighting from the French. It's a French martial art.
But that meant that you got training in France.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
You did training you went to France for a few years?
I was there for 3 years. Correct. I went over there with a scholarship from the French Federation for me to learn Savate. And what happened with Savate was that as soon as I got there, I already knew. But when I got there over there, I was led to different schools. I had a club of Savate in France. I was part of INSEP. I trained at INSEP. INSEP is the National Institute for the Sports, the professional sports, the Olympic team. I was there every day training with the French champions. That's all I did was Savate, and that was on a basis per day. I was training endless hours.
What exactly? Could you tell us a little bit about the training that you went through?
Sure. Every day, I would wake up at 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and I would go to Sorbonne University. In Sorbonne University, I'll be with my professor, Jean-Paul Viviani, from 8 o'clock to 10:30. Okay, and I'll learn Lacan, because the Lacan is the cane. It's a weapon art of Savate, and baton, which is a little quarterstaff. And after I finish that, I'll get on a train in the metro. I'll go through the metro and go to a train, and I'll go to INSEP, which was about 30 miles away. And when we get there in INSEP, what you used to do in INSEP was we went to the French team, and it was there from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock every day. And, I made a lot of great brothers, because every day you're punching and kicking each other. I can say this. I got hit by the best, and I hit the best back, those who were there, and we became brothers to this day. And it's a bond that's in there. It's unique to Savate, because you had Jews, Christians, Muslims, all training together in a fellowship, in a bond that nobody cared about. And there was no racism, that's what you can tell. It's a perfect element for that. I used to get back on the metro and go to Chadron to go teach my class over at ISPTT with Professor Michel Gilbert and Professor Andre Germain, who was always there, Professor Big Blue, what we call him. And after that, on Mondays and Thursdays, immediately right after that, I would finish by 6 o'clock. I would rush and run to the metro again and take off another 20 kilometers, 20 miles more, 40 miles more or less, to go to the town called Rueil-Malmaison to go train with my professor, Robert Paturel. And this was done all the time. The days that I didn't train with my Professor Paturel, I'll go visit other clubs.
Right. Can you explain to us exactly maybe some of the techniques?
Sure.
Savate?
The techniques are different. A lot of people look at like the kicks of Savate and everything else. And if you take a photograph and if you put that photograph to a kick from Kung Fu or Taekwondo or even Karate, people are going to say it's the same thing. The punches that you throw, if you take a punch from that, you put it next to a kickboxing picture or boxing picture because it's the same punches. Similar, because when you steal something and you end it, it's going to stay there. Okay. Now, what happens is that once you start moving, once you start learning, it's stylistically different. The mechanics are different. It's more natural. It's not as how can I say, as tense. It's actually an art that is very relaxing. The power is very
Or do,
camouflaged.
do you use a mixture of using your hands, your arm, your you can do headbutts, you can do I guess you can punch, you can kick. What else do you do under Savate? What
Well,
exactly?
let me let me let
And,
me because that's a good question. Can we use headbutts and stuff like that? Savate is a French martial art, like I said. But within Savate, there were other disciplines at one particular time. In the 1800s, you had Savate, and one of the main students broke off and ended up developing what is known as boxe française, French boxing. His name was Charles Lecourt, and he got beaten by an English boxer, got his nose broken, but he beat the English boxer. So he goes back to England to learn how to punch. He wanted, they're fighters. These guys wanted to learn how to fight. And so he comes back and he named it Adresse Parisienne from Paris. Along the lines, everybody started going. All the aristocrats started following that school, you know, and because he was very charismatic. And people like Victor Hugo, Alexander Dumas, Théophile Gautier, they all used to train. The artist Garvani, they all used to train in Savate in that time frame. And Monet and all those guys, they used to travel there because they used to hang around that type of element. And Charles Lecourt, with his students, Théophile Gautier, made a poem or wrote something for the newspaper. And he said everybody's kind of doing a fad, and it's going into what is now known as boxe française, in boxe française. So for a long time, you had those two arts. But you also had another art, which is a sailorman's art in France, which is known as chasson. Chasson was, the boat was looking, so they put their hand on the ground to kick upward. It was a type of fighting that was done in the sailors,
Marine,
in
right.
the marine,
Right.
in the navy,
Right.
And pirates had it. We can't say that. How were they fighting with boots on and everything on the thing? This is all that. That's
But
where
it
it comes
seems
from.
that when it comes to martial arts, there's more than, correct me if I'm wrong, there's more than 20 different forms of martial arts.
There's thousands.
There's quite a few, yes, there's quite a few, but I can only remember just 15 or 20 of them. But some of them make the sport, the Olympic sport, some have not. They're still evolving in their style. Do you think that, well, before I actually talk to you about the Olympics, I want to talk to you a little bit about how far does it go back? How far does Savate go in the history of
Oh.
martial arts?
In the history of martial arts and history of that, the first book, because I've written 15 books on the subject. The first book that comes out was a book on a baron that was from Scotland. It was in the 1400s. He mentions the word savate, that he was sending his sons to learn the noble art of French foot fighting, savate, but he spelled it with a double T. And there's some cards and there's some pictures and stuff like that in the 1600s, 1700s. You have some how can I say, words, mentionings of the fighting of it, but it really doesn't kind of take off until the 1800s. And 1800s, you start seeing a little bit more documentation. Again,
You,
printing.
you
also
saw a lot
comes.
of it in the European world.
Sure, sure. Um,
But isn't it kind of, well, maybe the word shouldn't be odd, but I guess different, that Savate, or that particular martial arts, developed pretty well in Europe, more so than they did in Asia, or did it
Not
not?
really, because it's very well documented in the 1840s. General Jappy, under the order of Napoleon during the Napoleonic War.
So you decided to go get Savate training in France, as opposed to getting training in Asia. What was the difference between both, or what is the difference between both the Savate in France and
To me, it's more of our line. We're Westerners. It goes deep into that. You know, the way you walk, the way a nation person walks is totally different. Our culture is different. The way we think is a lot different. It's a lot more malice. There's malice all over the place, but it's a little bit different here. You know, it's we walk heel to toe. Most of the arts that come from the West, you're on your toes. Whether it's boxing, whether it's wrestling, whether it's fencing, whether it's savate, whether it's sambo. Those are European arts. Capoeira, you're on your toes in a particular element in time.
Not a much more aggressive tone.
It's a little bit more. Yeah, of course. You know who conquered the world? If it wasn't Alexander the Great, you know, he was 21 years old. He had already conquered the known world.
Well, but coming back again, so there's different forms of Savate that you mentioned, but there seems to be some sense of difference. You chose to go to France. You chose to.
I received a letter with full scholarship from the
Right.
French Federation to go to France.
And
So
and you pretty much conquered, or you pretty much understood how Savate works in France. In
Yeah.
fact, you were involved in their tournaments. Explain to us a little bit about that. Your achievements in that work.
my achievements, well, I hate to.
No, but
Pat myself in the
because
back.
it goes well with this conversation, because
Okay.
obviously you did reach a pinnacle of success within the Savate world in France.
Well, I became the first American to receive the Silver Glove of Savate in France. I also became the first American to receive a professorate in all the disciplines of Savate. I also became the first non-European, non-French to receive a Silver 3 technical grade of Savate. I also became the first non-French to have a club of Savate in the history of Savate in France. But I think those are some achievements. You know,
Definitely.
how can I say? I was involved with a lot of great men that were professors that instilled that onto me, that push. I was not there. I didn't know that was happening. I just did it. And I remember when I received my silver glove, Mira Fati he's a professor, great individual. He's a national trainer of France right now, great colleague of mine. He tells me, we're very proud of you. You were the first American to come here to get the silver glove. And that's when it hit me.
Definitely impressive.
That's when it hit me. When I went to go pick up my diplomas, Claude Valide, which was a technical director, he said him and Alan Solomon, which was the president, and Michel Roger and others, they came together. There's a picture somewhere. They gave me they presented me with the professorship, and they said, "You're the first American to receive this." So I was like, I was in shock. But when you tell people that, you don't want to be.
No, I'm sorry, but certainly it shows your level of enthusiasm, passion, and actually involvement in that sport. That certainly needs to be mentioned as well.
And it's and thank you for that. But one thing I've learned from Savate is always trying to forge from you to be humble.
Right.
Humility has to be forged
Well,
constantly.
now that you mentioned that, what is the philosophy of Savate?
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Savate
is it a way of life, or is it
it's a way of life. We're sitting here in a beautiful place, and this has a lot of history. And funny to mention, I'm sitting here with my back against my back against the wall, looking at the doors that are coming in, and that's kind of instilled not only from that was my uncle and my professors and everybody else. They had that type of streetwise mentality that protected. It's kind of like always be not on the defensive, don't be paranoid, but always be ready,
right?
because you never know what's going to happen.
But that also gives you a sense of peace, doesn't it?
The more a man is able to control violence, the more peaceful he's going to become at the end. And if people do not know how to control violence, they're just going to be weak men, and people need to understand that. They need to go through that. I think we're the only culture that doesn't take our children to teach them how to defend themselves. Other cultures teach them as a way of passage. We've lost it.
Well, I did notice that Savate also has different forms within
Sure.
or methods
Of fighting with.
of fighting, and of course you got the club.
Yeah.
It's part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that Savate, if we can say it, because Savate is like Kleenex. It came first, right? So you have Savate, you have, and it became Boxe Française. And there were two distinct arts. Chasson was alongside there in the 1800s. But between Savate and Boxe Française, they didn't merge until 1978. In 1978, the both federations merged together and they said, let's make a complete French martial art. So the new art, what you see on YouTube, what you see on the TV, what you see there is called Savate Boxe Française. That's the sport. And I understand that. It's a beautiful sport. It's a sport that I love. But you also have La Canne, which is La Canne de Combat, another sport, kind of like similar, but with fencing with a cane. It has nothing to do with fencing, even though people try to say it has nothing to do with fencing. It has more to do with Savate than it does with fencing. Now, the martial aspect of it, the self-defense aspect of it, was being forced out because everybody wanted to do the sports, right?
Right.
So in 1994, when I received my professorate, and we had a seminar in Dallas, and all professors received a letter from Michel Roger, who was the president of the International Federation then. He said, no professor could teach Savate as a martial art for the street. It could only teach a sport. So we all said, wait a minute, what's going on? My professor, Robert Baturel, Viviani.
By the way, you did get your designation as professor,
right?
From there.
Yeah.
I mean, for in case of people ever ask, well, how did that title come in? Well, you got it because of your knowledge of
Absolutely, of the school.
and right? Because of your designation.
Absolutely. So going back with that, we ended up reforming or reviving the guild, or we call it the International Guild of Danse. We'll explain the name. And basically what it was we were able to teach the martial aspect of it, the disciplines that were being lost. Because there's people in France that do not know, that do Boxe Française, and others do Cannes, that don't know that they ever were together at one point in time. And when you explain to them, they look at you like, what? No, yeah, And so it's kind of sad, but I get it. I understand the reason why.
Well, there's been it has evolved, but then that's why you've created, or there is this, Danse
Savate. And a lot of people say, oh, well, is it dancing? No, it comes from a phrase. Hey, do you want to dance? You want to fight? You got beef. You want to dance. It's the same phrase in France.
But that's an interesting way of looking at it.
So
it's a match, but they may be called a dance because it really is. It's a dance method.
Yeah, correct.
It really, that's what it is. Then can you explain? You had an opportunity to train or to work with some mentors or some people. Could you mention some of those things?
Sure. I say this. I was taught how to fight by three people. I'll tell you, three people that taught me how to fight. One was Isidro Chapa, my uncle, Robert Baturel, and Sifu Keith C. from Kemp. Those were the people that taught me how to fight. I had a lot of other people that influenced me. In the ring, the one that taught me how to be in the ring and the ring savvy was my professor Richard Seeland, who was a phenomenal athlete. He actually, he was known as the man of precision, because he had so many knockouts to his name. 133 knockouts, stuff like that. He was the first one that went from Savate to kickboxing and annihilated Peter Cunningham, who was one of the strongest kickboxers America had, just annihilated him with movement. And other things that happened, and
these are your mentors.
These are the right.
But back then, but if I may,
Sure.
you mentioned at the very beginning about an incident that occurred with you when you were 6 or 8 years old. Could you tell the audience about that incident?
Sure.
That got you, that you actually, it seemed to open the door.
Absolutely. I went out there to play with some kids. We were living in apartments and got beat up by a couple of kids. And the next day, take me with my uncle. So my dad tells him, teach him how to fight. So I grew up with that type of mentality. You better stand up strong and don't let anybody push you around.
And these mentors were the ones who helped you
And
refine those methods.
And refine everything else. Sila Paturel, Jean-Paul Viviani, who taught me Lacan, who taught me Luc Parisian, Roger Lafont, which is another interesting individual. They took me to learn from him. He was in his 80s. He could still hit you. He used to use his hands, stick them at you. And we learned the last portion, which was called panache. Became a professor of panache. Roger Lafont came down here to Laredo in 1998. We had the first border rumble of Savate. And we were eating at a restaurant and he started crying. And, we were all sitting down, my father and Professor Andre Germain. Mark Senni was also another professor, another great individual. And what happens is that he starts crying because Lafont was was a prisoner of war, Second World War. He was in Stalingrad. And the Nazis told him that if he did not teach them, they were going to kill him. So he started teaching the Nazis Savate. So that's how the Germans got Savate, because he was teaching them. And I remember something that he told me was, sometimes you have to do something bad to do good. And I never understood that until I started 2 years later. And he died a very old man, very happy. He was content. That's a lot of history.
Yes, I would imagine he thought about all those moments. Yeah. I had a prior conversation with you on this issue, and you told me a similar story about Russia. How some of your
in Russia, here I am, 20 years old, 21 years old actually, and now that I think about it, I was 21 years old, and I was sent with several others of the French team, with Michel Roger, to go teach in Russia, to go teach Russians,
teach some classes.
Teach them for a whole week. So we were at St. Petersburg, the University of St. Petersburg, and we're all there, and they brought out, must have been about 140, 50 people, of all martial arts, all ranks, all ages. And they divided them into groups. They brought me because I knew English, So they gave me a set of people with numbers on them. And every single one of us had a set of people with numbers on them. And from, we had to judge them. Number 11, he's good for Savate. Number 12, no, he's not that good. Number 13, maybe so, he can get it. And at lunch, we turned that in. We came back after lunch, and the people that were not good at it were no longer there. And I was like, wow, the class got smaller. So you're teaching again, and that night, after it was over, the next day, the class got smaller. All of a sudden, they had a group of 30, 35 people, 36 people. And on Friday, they said, this is the Russian Savate Federation. And I'm like, wow,
You didn't know that was going to happen.
I didn't know that was going to happen. That's
the way Russia works.
That's the way Russia works. And They got the best of those people that could do it.
Yeah.
And they kept on going. And right now, Russia is a potential in Savate.
Yeah. Well, they do things different. That's all I got to say. But coming back to your experience with Savate, when did you first get a chance to use the Savate skills?
In the ring or in the street?
Well, in the street. You had mentioned earlier an incident that happened at the church.
There's a lot. There's a lot of it. You know, we went to school together. You know, and went to school. And in school, there's people that want to pick on you. People want to push you around, show their weight. And all of a sudden, you get a nice fist in the mouth, and they change their direction and they change their attitude. And that's usually what happened in high school. That's how you grew up here.
Yeah, well, that's
You know, and people don't understand that. You know, and there was, you know, now kids get ninth place trophies. You know, you don't get that. You know, in the street, you know, what happens when you're chased down the street and they're calling you alien and
but you,
wetbacks and all that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but did you ever use Savate skills?
Absolutely. You know, I did a lot of executive protection or bodyguarding back there and here. You know, so yeah.
Well, I mean, during all this time, though, you got married, you have kids, your family accepted Savate as part of your life, and they became also part of it.
My kids done it. My son just became a silver glove, you know, and he went through the whole trials and rigmarole of everything else. He started at the age of 8, and he turned 18, and he took a test with 3 professors, just the way it should be. You know, you go somewhere else and you get somebody in there, and you got people that pay $500 and they get a certificate in the mail, or they go to a seminar and they pay $2,000 and they get a certificate. That's not the way it is. You have to learn.
Well, what kind of people, such as your son, what is it that young people get out of Savate? What can they expect to find or get?
So let me put it in the right way. Savate will teach you discipline. Savate will teach you goal setting. Savate will teach you a desire to achieve. You know, when you hang around with people that are looking for something positive, you yourself are going to be gaining stuff positive. If you are looking for stuff that is not positive, or you're going to something negative, well, you yourself are going to follow that road. You know, tell me, like the old saying, tell me who you hang around with and I'll tell you who you are. The same thing happens here. If you're looking and I'm not saying Savate, it's something that was instilled to me.
Right.
You know, I know how
It becomes, but it is for self-defense purposes.
Absolutely.
So that becomes a martial art.
Absolutely.
But there are other types of martial arts that may be considered self-defensive.
They all should be self-defense.
But this one is special for you, or at least it works for you.
It's reality. It's a difference. We don't live in a fantasy. In Savate, if you don't block, just like boxing, if you don't block, you get a fist in your face. Here you can get a fist or a foot. So that changes ideas. And it's nothing, there's nothing magical in Savate. Nothing spiritual is going to come your way. There's no character that's going to come back and say, you know what, this is what's happening. That's not going to occur.
Some people have called it a sport of efficiency.
It is very effective.
How is that?
The kicks and the power that Savate has is very peculiar to the world of the martial arts, and it's different in the sense of how you're moving, the attacks. It's very unorthodox. I tell people this: I can make Savate look as pretty as 2 ballet dancers, and I can make it look as ugly as a dogfight. And it just depends on where it's going to be. Effective for the street, believe me, it's very effective.
Is Savate use use your arms more, or do you use your legs, or is it a combination of your legs and arms?
It's both. You know, it's Savate for the street, especially in Danse with Savate and some of the older forms of Savate. Headbutts were used, elbows were used, knees were used, eye gouges were here in the streets. It's a street fight, and there's techniques for that. And people don't understand because they look at the sport and the ring, they say, that's just kickboxing. And there's a lot more to it behind it. I'm glad they think that way because then that's the element of surprise.
Right. But let me ask you, then what about the difference between the European style and the American style?
The tenacity. The Europeans still very quick on their feet, and everything else in the United States was still the same. But the tenacity here has that American mindset. I'm going to take your head off. And that's the difference. The American fighters are very aggressive fighter. the American mindset for the streets are very, very dangerous. People don't want to see that reality. It's very ugly. If you've never been in the street, you can't see that. Here in the street, they'll pull a knife on you faster than you can say a, you know.
That would be much quicker.
And you know what I'm saying? So those elements are passed on with what you teach because you have to be ready for the unexpected. So you train on those elements.
Right.
You understand those elements. You know, people talk about, look, in the 18th century, there used to be a professor, a legend. His name was Hubert Le Brochure, 1860s around. And he was quoted as saying, if I do not have my pocket pistol, my cane, nor knife, I always have my boots on, and that's what Savate is. We live in Texas. People carry sidearms for protection. It's by law. You can carry a blade by law. We live in a bladed community. Laredo, South Texas, everybody has a blade on them. If you just look around, they have a knife, whether it's a clip point or whether it's on their belt. But the vast majority of men carry a blade.
Assuming again that they are not carrying a blade and you're out on the streets and you certainly are in a situation, this is where Savate kicks in.
Absolutely. You see, Savate kicks the legs. Very few martial arts kick the legs. When we first came in and used to spar people and used to kick them in the legs, they'll tell you don't do that. See, that's how I started teaching. I graduated at 16 and I was already in Dallas. When I was 17, I was doing some other martial arts and so on and so forth, and I was still coming back here and training with my uncle when I could. You know, on the weekends I'll come in here. Instead of going out there and drinking beer and hell raising, I was going to go train with my uncle for him to explain this and explain that and teach me this and teach me that. That's what I was doing. And so when we went back, a group of folks there were black belts in other systems. They'll get together and spar. You'll spar them, and all of a sudden you start kicking the legs, start moving around them. They did not know how to adapt to that, so they asked me, "Can you teach me?" So that's how I started teaching. Started teaching at the age of 18. Okay, so then when the French and my father talked with the French Federation, there was a young Frenchman in California, and Perry from San Antonio. We all kind of got together and started pushing Savate forward. That's where everything started taking off.
To make this
Understanding,
an American.
right.
Well, you've been at it for more than 40 years now, it seems. You've got a good bunch of young people who go on a daily basis to get training. You obviously have explained to us what the philosophy of Savate is and what young people can get out of it, and that's character building.
Exactly right.
And not only that, it's a sport of efficiency.
Absolutely.
When you're obviously you're against the wall and certain issues are going to happen, you're going to have to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
It's reality.
Absolutely. Much. Judge, how can we get across kids? How can we get them? I've been there. I've been bullied. I've been getting in fights there. I used to get in trouble with my parents, and sometimes I had good grades, sometimes I had bad grades. I know what it is when they got punished. I know how it is when they're down. So I know how to correlate with them in that sense. How to go with peer pressure. I was never into drugs. I had friends that did that, so I kind of stayed away. My father, my uncle kind of instilled the fear on drugs to me, which was good.
I think they did to many of us.
You know what I'm saying? So what happens with that is you try to instill that in the clubs that you make and try to make them better, because sometimes you get a lot of kids that come in. They're being bullied, what have you. It's a majority of the calls that I get. A daughter or a son's being bullied, period. And they bring them in. They see the confidence building. They see them move a little bit after 4 or 5 months. They take them out and they stick them somewhere else, in the school, football, basketball, what have you. Well, where's the bully going to be at? He's also going to go play basketball and football at the school. He's going to get bullied there as well. It's going to continue. It's going to be a never-ending cycle. And when parents bring their kids and they're learning, and the kid says, "I don't want to go anymore," instead of them telling them, you're going to go there, instead of making them, they tell them, "Okay, you can play Nintendo, PlayStation, whatever you want to at the house. It's okay, as long as you don't bug me." for the next 2 hours because I'm cooking dinner. Guess what happens? He's already teaching them how to quit. So what's going to happen when that kid now is a senior, a lot bigger than you, mom and dad, all of a sudden going to tell you, I don't want to go to school. I don't feel like going. I'm quitting. So you don't want to instill onto your children how to quit. You want them to finish off. Okay, you might not like it, but make it stay there at least 6 months, a year. Finish off what you did. Start it off and take off. Listen, fighting is not for everybody.
No, and that's not the only solution out there. I mean, obviously
There's others.
I mean, especially when there's bullying, you definitely need
You
to
need it.
you need to either defend yourself when there's no one else there, but if you still have an opportunity to change the outcome by talking to the teachers, the principal, your parents, you do what you got to do first.
Absolutely. It teaches you to stand up.
Right.
It teaches you to stand up. You know what? I might not have the physical ability to beat you up, but you know what? I have the physical ability now. I'm going to go up against you and I'm going to go tell the teacher because a lot of kids are afraid of that.
Why is it that boxing, which is a form of martial arts, even it's popular in South Texas more so, or there's other ones that are more popular? Is it because
You know,
you already know about it? I mean,
no,
Savate has not become a more common sport in South Texas. Is it because it's just not a well-known sport or martial arts?
number one, it's not well known. Everybody knows boxing. Boxing's been around for 200 years. Savate too, but Savate after World War II, only 35 men that did Savate were left. You know, so it had a lot of growing to do. So when it started regrowing back again, remember when I told you that there were two distinct arts, boxe française and Savate?
Right.
Well, boxe française and Savate during World War II played an important role, and that I'll get to it. So I'm going to show this. I'm going to tell this first. They played an important role. Both Savate groups had a French resistance groups within them, and the boxe française groups also had a French resistance within them. And Count Baruzzi was the one that led that side, and Lafont's crew led the other side. This was very well documented. So when the war was over, they came together trying to build it up. There was not that many people left teaching. Not many men left teaching. So they really started from zero. The people that embraced Savate were the people from judo. So in the 50s, the people from judo absorbed Savate inside. So it was known as a Savate Judo. There was a World Savate Judo Federation. Here's something that people do not understand. Savate had colored grades for ranking: blue glove, green, red, white, yellow, so on, so on, until you get to silver. Well, that color grading system, the color grading system idea was passed on directly to judo. The Europeans started devising a belt system in judo. Well, guess what? The Japanese liked it. They continued with it. And all of a sudden, every martial art after the 60s started with a belt system. So a lot of ideas of Savate went to the east and not the other way around.
Right, but it just seems that, like I said, Taekwondo, Jiu-Jitsu, they caught on. But they had a set of rules. It seems to that they have set of rules. I mean, even Savate was in the Olympics up to the 1920s.
Yeah.
We had a prior conversation about the different forms in different countries. Because of the fact they have different forms, do you think that has led to differences of style, which has not allowed it to become an Olympic sport?
No, it has to be more on administrative and legalities, and that's where we're going. That's where it's at. Let the chips fall where they may fall. Listen, we formed USA Savate here in '96, and Congressman Henry Cuellar at the time was representative, and Representative Dale Tillery were very, very much involved in the creation of USA Savate. And we went from there because we wanted to build this. USA Savate Commission could gather clubs from around the United States, kind of like USA Boxing, have regionals, have a national, and take them to France. Well, we did that. We had a lot of competition, believe me. When we went to the U.S. Olympic Committee, the U.S. Olympic Committee says, we recognize you all, but you are not an affiliate because the International Federation of Savate is not part of the International Olympic Committee. You need 72 countries, I believe, with an association or federation of that is national, that is recognized by that country's Olympic Committee before they can go into the International Committee. What happens with the French is they don't use that. What happens is they'll call somebody that did Taekwondo in Bolivia, and they'll say, okay, now you're going to be the head of Savate here, and you're the chief or what have you, and all of a sudden you can bring in people to come over here, or wherever they want. So there's very few countries that are literally accepted by their Olympic Committee. I know France is, Belgium is, Italy is, Germany is, Croatia, and so is Russia. But a lot the other ones are not. So it's not.
But until that happens, until then, I mean,
you're not going to see it.
Savate's not going to be seen as a force in
No,
terms of
exactly right.
international force because of it.
Actually,
And it's all
absolutely
because
right.
of administrative matters, not because of the sport itself or the martial arts form.
Absolutely, it's administrative matters that have not played that role.
Exactly. Well, it just seems that it has a lot of potential, but it seems also that a lot of the administrators in different countries need to work. The masters need to get together and agree to the terms. And they just haven't. But they did it back up to the 1920s. It was an active sport.
Because back in the 20s and 30s, there was no Olympic board. There was a board that would sit down and, okay, you're here, you're here, you're there.
Yeah.
But nobody was really doing anything else. You know, there was nothing set up like it is now.
Now, you obviously have had a long history with USA Savate. Now, as I understand, you started USA Savate.
Correct. We started USA Savate in 1996 because we had some sanctioned events under the Texas Association of Savate, which is probably the oldest association in not only in Texas, in the United States. And we were already having competitions. We had the Metro Blast in Dallas in 92, 93, 94. And one of the competitions, a boxing commissioner showed up. And his name was Dickie Cole, who was the head boxing commissioner. And he sat down, he talked to us, he sat down with us. He said everything was A1. He saw that we had doctors that were being checked by doctors. You understand everything that was there. So we went back several times to Texas, to the Capitol. In fact, Congressman Henry Cuellar back then was a Texas representative, and that's before he became Texas Secretary of State.
Right.
And so we had a lot of conveying back and forth with the Department of Licensing and Regulations, which is the Boxing Commission. And finally it was accepted, and we had to form a completely new entity, and we did that to encompass all the other, how can I say, movements of Savate that were in the United States. So we named it the USA Savate Boxe Française and Can de Combat Commission to handle those sports. And to this day, Texas is the only state in the union that allows for the competition of Savate to be taking place.
Right. Did you ever? So obviously, you did do competitions throughout the state. Did you ever do any competitions outside the country?
Yes, we did. We did several. We had we had regional states, we had smokers, we had international competitions. The first international competition was held here in Laredo. It was in 1999, and in 1999, I told the French, because the French have a way of things. Okay, I'm not degrading them because I love the culture. I love the people. There's people over there that I believe they're to me they're like family. But the French when it comes to an organization, they're very nationalists. They're not patriotic in percent, the people are. But what I mean by nationalists, they want to be number one, regardless of what happens. So what occurs is you get people, countries that do not have the depth of the sport of Savate. And the French tell them, come over and have an international. And they fight with their national team, which has 100 bouts, against somebody that just started Savate 6 months, 3 months, maybe a year if lucky. And they annihilate them. It happened to Japan. And Japan for a long time didn't have Savate. Right now it's trying to get back into it. So I knew that could occur because I saw it, I witnessed it. So I told them, bring me back pair to pair. So we had some fights here.
Good.
And one of my students, it was at the Civic Center, one of my students, and when I saw the other guy's passports, a sporting passport, in Savate you have a sporting passport, how many fights you have, the guy was the second of Europe. And I told him, you want to try it out? Him being a kid, a tough kid from the street, being with us in Savate, he goes, Profe, I'll do it, let's just go inside. And then was Jesus Garza. Went inside, ends up knocking him out. The other guy was showboating. He gave him a jab cross, down he went for the count. He became the first American to knock out a Savate guy.
And this was actually a
sanctioned,
sanctioned.
yeah, it was a sanctioned bout. And I remember the international vice president at the time was Gilles Ledvigo. He goes, yeah, but that guy's not French. He's actually from Morocco. His passport says he's a French citizen. He's French. I said, you can't come up with this stuff, because they didn't want that to be.
Yeah.
So we had fights with the French here. We had fights there. The Belgians here and there. Italians in Belgium. We had representatives in Britain. And they're all fared pretty darn good, we had a great team.
Well, Laredo certainly has a lot to appreciate the fact that you started this organization in Laredo, and to give some notoriety and some notice for Laredo being a Savate, a place where you can do Savate. That's pretty impressive.
Yes, no, what's impressive is the spirit that we had, because everybody was,
The camaraderie.
that fellowship was going on very strong until the wars was really what gave downfall here to Savate, because the last U.S. Nationals was in 2005, in the middle of the war of Iraq and Afghanistan. Most of that generation was depleted. We're no longer here.
Well, we look forward to it coming back one of these days.
Yep.
Obviously, you have a lot of experience doing this, so I'm sure it'll come back.
Well, thank you. Well, it will.
Yeah.
It will.
Well, coming back then in South Texas and in Laredo, you continue to have hundreds of young people who go through your gym and get training. And you got some good people. You mentioned even Congressman Henry Webb being one of them. Is that where you're going to continue with Savate?
We've had some great individuals come in. We've had some individuals that have gone through the Savate, have been ranked in Savate. You know what? I say ranked up to red glove, because a red glove in Savate, dancer Savate, is equivalent to a black belt in karate. So when they get to red, you start seeing, because of knowledge of fighting, right? So but you see a lot of the students that we have, we have some lieutenant commanders, we have some colonels, we have a lieutenant colonel, we have a lieutenant commander, we have a young man from Laredo that did 4 tours in Afghanistan, became a ranger, special forces. You know what I'm saying? Those type of individuals. We have doctors, we have lawyers that have come out because of that. And we produce some great champions as well, because not only do we have, there were clubs involved in Savate here in Texas. You got Illinois that was involved in it. You had Tennessee that was involved. You had California that was involved. You had Colorado that was involved. You had, at one particular time, you had Georgia that was involved. And you had some groups from Oklahoma, too, that came involved. We produced the majority of the champions of USA Savate. Now, what you start seeing with everybody else is you start seeing that at that time frame when I was really I was also heavily involved in USA boxing, from, my uncle. When
Right.
my uncle, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. When he was passing, he was on his deathbed, he made me give him a promise. And he says, bring people and take them back to the ring and make them champions. Promise me that. I said, sure. So I started right after I started getting involved with USA Boxing. I was involved with USA Boxing for 98, 99, 2000, 1, 2, 3, but 6 years. In those 6 years, we took 27 people. We had 23 Golden Glove recipients. We produced the first gold recipient of Laredo, Nancy Liendo. So we had a great, a great run. I got out because of issues of there's boxing's a beautiful sport, but among there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of backstabbing, and there's a lot of
But different issues with everybody. But coming back to your gym, so you've got young men, and do you have women as well?
Absolutely.
And what is the age limits, or what is your
Legally, we can start off a child at the age of 8.
okay?
Just because we're underneath the Department of Licensing and Regulation, which is the Boxing Commission. And what happens is that after that,
You have boys and girls, and they go through different grades or different levels of training.
absolutely,
And you
you
have
test once per year.
Okay.
And little by little, they start growing, they start moving.
and then they move up until like the high level. Do you foresee Laredo continuing, at least this area, to continue to have a strong Savate program?
I do see, because we have some great individuals. Now I'm 50. I'm 54. I'm gonna be 55 in a couple of months. Next year I'll be 56. I started at the age of 6. That means I did it.
You've got a
50
lot
years,
of, you still got a lot of time.
So what I want to do is I want to start making sure that we have some good teachers that are out there with good responsibility and a good head on their shoulders.
Well, there seems to be a lot of room still for Savate to grow,
Absolutely.
and you got many, many years to go as well.
Absolutely.
And you seem to have gotten the support from home as well.
Well, it's my life, I guess.
Yes.
This is what I've done, my passion. Even though I do other things, but everything's around the Savate.
And it seems that your uncle played a major role, and so he kept you, or you had a very good relationship with him to keep this sport going.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. There was a lot of things that my uncle had a history here. He taught a lot of in the '60s and late '50s and '60s. He taught a lot of very potential men that became they were very capable and became distinct in their own right. Like attorney Jimmy Sandoval.
Yes.
You know who he was. Judge Manuel Flores. Dr. Varela Gonzalez. Many others, Mauro Sandoval, and others that were Olguin, the others that were there that continued that. Some of them continued the boxing, but the other ones became very great at what they did. Chicho Palacios, one of the, other people that were around that he instilled a lot onto them. Kike Jaime and Jaime brothers.
these are all great people in the community who played. They took leadership roles in our community the last 20, 30 years.
You know what gets me is that this is the only boys club in the United States that does not have a boxing program. Does not have a boxing program. I mean, my uncle died in there, rotted himself away teaching these kids inside the boxing, inside the boys club. That and basketball, and so that's what you start looking at, But I think what it's not everybody's going to become champion. Okay, not everybody is going to become a world champion or a U.S. champion or a Texas champion or a Golden Glove champion here. But the instant that they conquer that fear, that bully that's telling them stuff like this, and they stand up for them, they just became that world champion. They got that title behind them. They got everything else in them. You see that energy that's built behind them. That's what Savate means. That's what it is. and unfortunately, that's that's what makes people, once you conquer that fear and you're courageous about it, everything else is easy.
Well, now obviously your uncle played a major role, obviously, in your training, but the other person who played a role was your father, Dr. Buitron,
Absolutely.
from the very beginning. Tell me a little bit.
My dad was very harsh. He was very, don't come here with your ass kicked, I'm going to belt you. There was an incident one time we were living in Louisville, Kentucky. Actually, let's go back a little bit. We're living in Baltimore, Maryland.
That was before you became, or you were
Before
just learning.
I learned some stuff with my uncle, and then when we moved to Baltimore, my dad would continue doing that. The room and the house and outside.
He sort of mentored you through the
Right.
process. I mean, he kept you interested.
Right, and then I remember I was in school. I was in third grade, and the teacher says, was talking about sin, and he called me a wetback. Didn't know what a wetback was.
But it didn't sound good.
Everybody was laughing and everything else. I was like, what the hell? So I came back, and my dad picked me up and picked me and our neighbors. Her name was Mike Vigorito, and I had tears in the eyes, and my dad said, "What the hell? What's wrong with you?" He didn't say what the hell. He said, "What's wrong with you?" And Mike said, "Oh, the teacher called him a wetback." My dad stopped the car, and we drove back and go, "What?" So I remember we walked back and goes, "The teacher." You remember we were walking down the hall. My dad's walking in front of us, and we're walking behind, and Mike. We're walking towards when we walk into the teacher's room, and my dad tells me, "Hey, what did you call my son? A wetback?" The guy was tall, taller than my father. My father's 5'7". And the guy said, "What are you going to do?" It started back and forth, arguing, this and that. All of a sudden, my dad told him, "Let's forget we're both professionals. Let's forget that I'm a doctor. Let's forget that you're an instructor. And we're going to decide about it right now." The guy took a swing at my father. My father wrapped him up like a pretzel, dropped him to the ground, popped him a couple of times in the face. That time, one of the brothers came. What was the problem? So took us to the office. They conveyed. That was the end of that. That's how I found out what a wetback. But in Louisville, Kentucky, we moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and I was chased by the kids to the house. A bunch of kids were calling me Iranian and alien and all kinds of. That was around the Iranian crisis, So
Yeah, back in the late
in the
70s.
And they threw a rock at the window, and they cracked it. My dad, "What's going on?" They go, "Oh, we want to fight your son. Let's fight your son." "You want to fight him?" It pulls me out of the house. He goes, "Okay, come over here." And he has me by the corner. I'm like, "What?" My dad's going to take me to go fight these kids. I'm not going to tell them to leave. So it goes out there in the middle of this field that was there in front of the place where we lived. He says, "Okay, you want to fight him? You fight him." And he looks at me and goes, "Do everything your uncle and aunt have taught you. And if you lose, I'm going to belt you." Poor kid. I feared more my father and I feared the kid, so I popped him around left and right. That's the type of father I have. Imagine how many fathers would take their kid out of their house to go fight some kids that are bullying him. Take them outside.
But that was also a different time, though.
You don't have that many people.
No, but you certainly you don't encourage that.
I don't want anybody to do
You know,
that.
But it worked for you. It definitely tells you.
It did something.
It does. I mean, in our time, that's what we were raised with a belt. Corones.
Yeah,
and the spanking at the schools and all that. I mean, it was a different time, but it worked.
So that's what happened. But my father was very harsh in that sense. But in that sense, I love him to death.
Of course, but then he also helped you grow. He raised you, mentored you to stay with this profession. That says a lot. Definitely, it's definitely.
And, and
It's
his bro-
good
his
when
brothers
it's
were
good
that
when
way.
you have a bonding like that with your father in terms of mentoring. Very important. You had a father. Many of those kids don't have a father. It's a big difference.
Absolutely.
And that's what they should be a part. They should learn how to defend themselves.
Absolutely. And that's just the way it was, And
Yeah. It seems to me that you certainly have many more years to go. A lot more excitement to come. A lot more kids to teach and train, and a lot more stars to come out of your gym. So
we'll try to do the best we can and try to move it forward.
you seem to have had an amazing ride.
Amazing. Exactly right, And um,
But you still have that challenge, and that is the more. I mean, I guess that challenge will be resolved once.
nobody's made a world champion of Savate from the United States. Nobody has. Back in '93, I was a contender for that. I was signed up. My Professor Buitron signed me up. In '94, I was going to fight again for the world title, and I blew my hand. I had 11 reconstructive surgeries, blew all the tendons in my left hand. When that occurred, the doctor said, "You're never going to ride again. I'm a southpaw. You're never going to be right. You're never going to ride again. You're never going to use your hand again." After a 10-hour surgery, the first surgery, I went in there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I got out. I remember teaching that night, going to the bathroom and throwing up and still teaching. Those were the hardest parts or years that I could say. That's when I said to myself, let's keep fighting, because, of course, I wanted to fight for the title. Within a year, I had 6 more surgeries. On the 6th one, because I had blown the tendon, the doctor says you're going to have transplants of tendons to see if we can get your hand to work. I remember leaving that place, and I had a paradigm shift, of life. And I didn't drink back then. I drank every so often, but I said to myself, I called my father, and here's something to put you into that mindset. And I said, you know what? The doctor says this. I'm so fucking pissed off. I remember telling him that, I'm so pissed off at what's come to this. I'm going to go stop and have a drink. And I'll go back to the school. I was living in Dallas. I was the only one by myself. While I was driving, I stopped at the first bar that I saw. And went to the bar, and I was, and I was talking. I was talking to one of the waitresses that was there. We were just making small talk. I had taken 2 sips of my drink, and these 2 guys came in and grabbed the waitress's rear end, grabbed her in the ass. And I saw that, and I turned around and said, "Hey, bro."
The assaulted her, in other words.
Yeah, the assaulted her and say, "Hey, don't do that." I remember one of the guys, turns around and says, "Fuck you, Spick." And it was on. I remember kicking that guy's head into the sheetrock. And I left. Got in the car and took off. Between Dallas and Irving, there's a railroad track, and I stopped, and I just said to myself, what the hell am I doing? Is this what it's all about? I got to the gym. There was a nice teacher. He already passed away. It was Richard Peralta, a good Gajo Kembo instructor, very good friend with my instructor, TC. And he goes, "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah." We started talking. He goes, "Bunch of stuff you can do here." I told him what had happened. And he says, first of all, you have to start teaching them how to control what you control. I'm like, control what I control. So that's how we started. He had a very nice talk with me. He says, you have a gift, and that gift you have to pass it on to others. You have to understand that others, you have to make them there, because others don't have that courage, and you have to stand up for it.
But I want to stress, though, obviously you made all these experiences that went through to you were self-defense. All of them were self-defense. You were never,
I can say this, I've never taken a wrong step in vain. Everything that, if I've ever
so,
gotten.
I mean, for people who are listening, they need to understand that all this was self-defense
Absolutely.
techniques. They
And
were
the-
never
and-
done in an aggressive manner in terms of you starting a fight or you
Absolutely.
doing the.
What people need to understand is this, I don't condone fighting, but I also don't condone a person to become a coward. This is not for you to use to become a leader of a gang or leader of what have you, or go become a tough guy and go over here and look at that. That's not what this is about. What this is about you learning how to defend yourself, because guess what? Maybe you're going to defend your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother, your neighbor's kids. That's what we men do. We defend others. And women too. And we have to learn how to defend that. And that is being taken away from us. That's what you have to do. You have to stand up enough. That's why I continue teaching what I teach, because I love the community of Laredo. I know that there's something missing here, that our young men and girls are not being taught correctly, and they need to have that self-control and understanding what it's about. You know, because it's very dangerous.
Definitely. I mean, out there on the streets, there's no cop, there's no mom, there's no judge. It's just you and that aggressive person.
It's you in that situation.
And
you have to
need
leave.
you have to, and if you can't leave, and you can't just, you gotta work it through. You gotta have those self-defense techniques.
You have to, and you have to learn how to. You have to learn how to defend yourself,
Yes.
and you have to learn how to control that.
Well, I think you said it best when you said it's a sport of reality, a sport of efficiency, and it's something that needs to, when there's nothing else, is self-defense techniques.
Absolutely. You know, Judge, people do not understand that in the self-defense situation, most fights in the world do not last more than 8 to 10 seconds. If it goes further than that, they probably end up in the ground, or you probably end up with what I call heroes are trying to stop you. Somebody else is trying to stop the fight from going on. And that right there can get dangerous as well. So if you're ever in that situation, you have to be in and out of there very, very quickly. And people do not understand that mindset. And it's that streetwise mentality, that streetwise sage mentality that Savate has. My uncle had it, Paturel had it, Viviani had it, you know, the people that we hang around with had it. Apart from the ring savvy, because these guys, you know, I was very, very, very fortunate to be trained by Richard Sela. I was very fortunate to be accepted to go into Clichy with Sud Massage and to see how they were trained, and to see, you know, Sud Massage is probably, to me, he probably is the man, the professor that has created more champions in the world. There's a plaque out there that says, in all the differences, kickboxing, Thai boxing, boxing, what have you. He has created, back then was 763, I was just trying to look at the thing. So over 650 champions from all age categories he has produced. So it's quite amazing what it is.
Definitely.
You know, you asked me something earlier that I said I was going to come back. You says, everybody thinks that the martial arts comes from the East. No. The martial arts come from all over the place, but Savate has influenced way too many martial arts of the East than what the Eastern martial arts have influenced in Savate. They, you know, there's a picture of in my school of the founder of Shotokan Karate, the Funakoshi, Zensu Funakoshi. When they were all in the armies, apparently, there's a picture of a French corporal, Legrand, who was sent to Japan to teach the Japanese army boxe française. You have to realize that Shotokan Karate didn't come out until the 20s. This is 1907. You know, they were young men.
And there's also more recent picture, of course, of the big actor
And
Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee was another one. Bruce Lee was studying from a book of Savate. There's a lot of different stories, but he never did Savate. He studied from a book of Savate, of what I've gotten into it, and he formed because of that. Because Bruce Lee was very intelligent. He was able to capitalize and not mimic or correlate to what he did, and he changed it into what it is now known Jeet Kune Do, his art. And those guys are very good. They're good guys, you know. And it's always changing.
I can see that it seems to be evolving every generation, and it's sort of at the end of the day, though, it sort of mixes in with each one of them. All of these are different martial forms of art. Like you said, to me, I can count maybe 20 or 30, but there's more than 30 or 40 different types of martial arts. Some of them are part of the Olympics, some are not part of the Olympics, and they evolve. They continue to evolve.
Some are combative sports, some are just sports by themselves, some are self-defense systems, some are combative systems.
But Savate certainly is one of those basic martial art forms that people can learn and defend themselves when it's necessary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, once more, you know, that's what Savate is. Reality.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the interview. I'm sure a lot of people in the community did not know of the history and now have a greater understanding and appreciation of the type of work that you've done.
Well, thank you.
For doing that.
You know, I hope those that are out there that, you know, that wish to learn, look for something, whether it's Savate or any other martial arts, just get involved. Get involved. But you know,
but you're still an active, you still have a gym and you still an active trainer.
right, it's still here. It's been in the same place at 220 West Hillside Road. You know, it's been
Right.
there in the corner. You can find us every day training. And, you know,
On a daily basis.
On a daily basis.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf
thank
of
you.
hundreds of people out there, you've definitely, or thousands of people, you've actually trained. Obviously, you are an expert in your field, and I'm sure you've got many more years to go to teach a whole bunch of more kids. Thank you.
That's what. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I want to thank you again for watching the program. I urge for those of you who are interested in more in self-defense, we're having a conversation with a great master here. I would suggest you give him a call. Professor Buitron is listed on the phone book, and he can tell you a lot more than what we learned today. Thank you for watching, and thank you again.